My cheating wife tried to blackmail me into staying and looking after a kid that wasn't even mine, so I came up with a plan to expose her lies and clear my name for good. I often tell myself I should have seen the signs earlier. It's hard to admit that I might have been blind or naive, but marriage can do that to a person. You become so used to the routine, shared meals, small talk about each other's day, the occasional argument over who does the dishes, that you stop noticing when certain changes creep in. You stop looking for evidence that the life you cherish has become a stage set for deception. My name is Elliot Jennings. I'm 29 years old, and I've been married to Sophia for 3 years. Before that, we dated for about a year and a half. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said my marriage was far from perfect but still salvageable. My job takes me away from home more than I'd like, and Sophia always seemed a bit restless, complaining that I wasn't around enough. I told myself that couples go through ruts and that if I tried a bit harder, took an extra day off, surprised her with a thoughtful gift, we'd find our way back. But that was all before I discovered her betrayals. Before I stumbled onto the fact that Sophia has been sleeping with other men, multiple other men, throughout our entire relationship, even from the early days. And it's not just strangers. Some are men I know, co-workers, friends. Let me tell you, it's like having your heart shredded and your mind set on fire, all in the same breath. And that isn't even the worst of it. Sophia is pregnant, about 5 months along. Until recently, I was ecstatic at the thought of fatherhood. I was gearing up to renovate the spare bedroom as a nursery, picking out paint colors, yellow, because we wanted something gender neutral. Then, in one horrifying instant, it hit me. If Sophia has been unfaithful all this time, how do I even know the baby is mine? The day I found out she'd been cheating was the day that changed me. Maybe I'll never again be that trusting, soft-hearted man I used to be. Maybe that's the price of heartbreak. But it's also the day I resolved to find proof that this child, as innocent as it may be, isn't my biological responsibility. My new purpose became clear: to clear my name before we sign any divorce papers, so I'm not roped into paying child support for the rest of my life, for a child that isn't even mine. Let me take you back to how I found out. Maybe that'll help me piece together how we got here. A few weeks ago, I was at work, an ordinary Wednesday. I work in a corporate setting, mid-level management in a logistics company. I was reorganizing some shipping schedules when I got a text from my coworker, Travis, that said, "Hey man, are you okay?" That was strange. Why wouldn't I be? I texted back. His response was immediate. Heard weird rumors. People are talking about Sophia seeing someone else. Didn't want you to be blindsided. My heart pounded. A rumor, I told myself, might be just idle gossip. Except the text was from Travis, someone I considered a friend. He's not the kind to spread baseless drama. I felt a chill creep through my veins. My hands were trembling as I typed. What exactly did you hear? Travis replied with a few sentences that might as well have been a death knell for my marriage. He said there had been talk around the break room. One of my other co-workers, a smug jerk named Andre, claimed he knew from experience that Sophia wasn't faithful. He bragged about hooking up with her months ago, back when we were first married. Travis, outraged by the gossip, warned me to check it out for my own peace of mind. I felt a swirl of rage and nausea. The thought of Sophia with Andre, my co-worker, a man who laughed with me during team lunches, who slapped my back after a big project, was unimaginable. I wanted to smash something, or maybe vomit. Instead, I asked for the rest of the day off, citing a family emergency, then drove home with white knuckles on the steering wheel. Sophia was there, lounging on the couch. She looked innocent enough, wearing sweatpants and flipping through channels. My heart twisted. For a brief second, I thought, this is a woman you love. She can't possibly, but the doubt was too strong. I confronted her. I tried to stay calm. Soph, I heard something horrible today at work. She frowned, pausing the TV. What do you mean? I told her about the rumors, about Andre. I expected an immediate denial, tears, righteous anger. Instead, she stared at me, her complexion turning pale. I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, and that's when I knew. She didn't even try to lie at first. She mumbled something about how it happened once, that she regretted it, that she was lonely. Every word struck like a hammer blow. My mind reeled. I wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake. But the more questions I asked, the more truth spilled out like sewage from a broken pipe. She admitted she'd been with Andre more than once. She admitted there were others. I pressed further. Names, Sophia. Who else? She stayed silent, tears dripping down her face. I threatened to pack up and leave if she didn't talk. That's when she told me about Nick, another co-worker of mine, another friend. She even hinted that there were some men I didn't know personally, guys she met at bars or through mutual acquaintances. It made my blood run cold. I was too shocked to react properly. I just sat on the edge of the couch, holding my head in my hands, feeling my world collapse. That's how I learned my marriage was basically a lie, that my wife had slept around with no regard for the vows we made. We argued for hours. I demanded to know if the baby she carried was truly mine. She insisted it must be, but how could she be so sure? Her expression was full of doubt, and that told me everything. In the midst of sobbing, she tried to blame me. She said I was emotionally distant, that I never had time for her. She insisted she was starved for attention. Some vile part of me almost found logic in that statement, but I was too consumed by betrayal. My mind was spinning. My wife, my friends, my co-workers, the baby, a swirl of heartbreak, humiliation, and fury. I drove off. I needed space. I ended up at a nearby motel, a grimy place with a flickering neon sign. I sat there in the darkness, replaying everything in my head. 2 hours ago, I'd had a wife and a soon-to-be child. Now, it felt like I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a car that needed new brakes. Over the next few days, I took time off work. My boss was concerned. Maybe he'd heard the rumors, too, but he gave me personal leave without many questions. I consulted a lawyer, Ms. Hampton, who specialized in family law. Through tears and shaky sentences, I told her about the situation. She was calm, professional, and laid out my options. Divorce seemed inevitable. Ms. Hampton explained that if Sophia is pregnant during our marriage, there would be a legal presumption that I'm the father, unless I can prove otherwise. My stomach twisted at the phrase child support. I knew how merciless the system could be in cases like this. Even if the baby isn't biologically mine, if we remain married and the child is born, I might be on the hook unless I prove paternity isn't mine. So, with a lawyer's guidance, I initiated divorce proceedings. She filed the papers, set up a plan for me to move out, which I'd already done, and recommended we handle the paternity question immediately. In an ideal scenario, we'd do a straightforward DNA test once the baby was born. But that was months away. Ms. Hampton mentioned that some prenatal tests exist, but they're expensive and sometimes require the mother's cooperation. I pictured trying to convince Sophia to take such a test. She'd never agreed to it voluntarily. Her newly vindictive attitude was clear in every phone call we had since I left. She argued, threatened, cried, cajoled. She accused me of abandoning her and the baby. She raged about how I was worthless, how she'd ruin my reputation, how she'd take me for everything if I dared to cut her off. At first, that cut deep, but eventually I got angry. How dare this woman, who betrayed me a dozen times over, act like I was in the wrong for leaving? Yet that's how manipulative relationships work. The cheater can twist the narrative to make themselves a victim. The threats arrived in quick succession. Sophia said if I tried to end the marriage, she'd claim I was abandoning a pregnant wife, painting me as a monster who walked away from his unborn child. We live in a no-fault divorce state, so a cheating might not matter much in court. She threatened to file for alimony and child support. "You'll regret this," she hissed in one phone call. "I'll make sure you pay for your betrayal, Elliot." My betrayal? The irony was so thick I felt like choking. But from a purely legal standpoint, if I don't prove a baby isn't mine, I might be on the hook. The heartbreak was bad enough. I didn't want to be dragged over hot coal financially for a child that isn't mine. In a moment of panic, I called Ms. Hampton again. She reaffirmed that legally I had to act fast. If she has the baby before the divorce finalizes, the system often presumes you're the father, she said. You need proof, Elliot. I spent the rest of that day pacing the motel room, trying to figure out how to get that proof. The baby wasn't born yet, and Sophia sure wouldn't do a prenatal test to help me. I felt trapped, until a plan began to form. What if I found the real father? If I tracked down the men she'd been with, at least the likely candidates, and convinced one of them to do a paternity test, that would be enough to cast reasonable doubt in court. Right? It was a long shot, but desperation fueled strange creativity. A single test from potential father's DNA could show he's a father, or at least show a strong likelihood. If I found the correct man, that would clear me. So I started making a list of names, gleaned from the arguments we had. Nick, Andre, possibly others. She mentioned hooking up with a neighbor once. For all I knew, it could have been multiple random men. But I had to start somewhere. The plan was simple on paper but felt gut-churning in reality. I'd approach each man, see if they'd be willing to do a paternity test. If one of them turned out to be a match, great. I'd have legal ammunition to prove I'm not the father. If none of them matched, I'd have to keep looking. Step 1. I needed stealth. If Sophia caught wind of what I was doing, she'd double down on her threats, maybe even claim I was harassing her lovers. Step 2. I needed DNA samples, preferably voluntarily. Actual cooperation from these men would be easiest. If they refused, I wasn't above more desperate measures, like grabbing a discarded soda can or cigarette butt. But I hoped to keep it legal and straightforward. I started with Nick, since I actually considered him a friend once. I sent him a text, "Need to talk. Coffee tomorrow." He replied that same night, "Sure thing, man. Everything okay?" My heart pounded. I wanted to confront him about sleeping with my wife. I wanted to punch him in the jaw. But I also needed his cooperation, so I had to keep calm. We met at a neutral coffee shop the next morning. My palms were clammy as I waited, the familiar hum of an espresso machine in the background. Nick arrived, sporting a look of uneasy curiosity. We settled into a corner booth. I didn't waste time with small talk. "So," I began, "I know you slept with Sophia." Nick's face paled. He stammered something about how it happened only once, that he was drunk, that he regretted it. I stared at him, trying to quell my fury. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "She's pregnant. I'm almost certain the baby's not mine. I need your help to prove it, so I'm not stuck paying child support." Nick blinked, horror crossing his features. "Wait, why you think the baby might be mine?" "It's possible," I said, crossing my arms. "I need you to do a paternity test." He leaned back, hands trembling around his coffee cup. "Man, this is insane. I can't have a kid with Sophia. That can't be mine." I pressed forward. "If it's not yours, the test will clear you. If it is, well, we have a right to know." I tried to soften my tone. "Look, I'm not trying to attack you. I just need the truth." Nick set his coffee down, eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it. But how? Don't you need her involvement for a prenatal test?" I explained my plan. We'd do a potential father test that I could bring to my lawyer. It wouldn't be a typical paternal test with a mother's involvement, but if he was a strong match, it would be enough to cast doubt on my fatherhood. Ms. Hampton had given me contact info for a lab that specialized in such tests, albeit ones used in lesser-known paternity disputes. Nick grimaced. "Fine. If it helps, I'll do it. But if that baby's mine," his voice cracked, "I don't know what I'll do." I found myself pitying him. I tried to push that aside. Nick had betrayed me, too, but in this moment, we both stood to lose a lot if the truth didn't come out. We left, setting up a time to meet the lab's representative. I felt a sense of accomplishment tempered by dread. That was one name on the list. Would I have to do this with every suspect? Next up was Andre, the jerk who bragged about it at work. Unlike Nick, he had no illusions about being my friend. I cornered him in the company parking garage one afternoon. My approach was blunt. "I know about you and Sophia. Is that baby yours?" Andre smirked. "Maybe. You planning on raising it if it is?" My blood boiled, but I forced a calm I didn't feel. "If it's yours, you can raise it. I'm divorcing her." I explained the paternity test plan. Unlike Nick, who was worried, Andre seemed amused. "Sure, man," he said, leaning against his car door. "I'll give you a sample. No skin off my back. But if the kid's mine, I'm not paying a dime. It was just a fling, you know?" I stared daggers at him. "You can take that up with Sophia," I hissed. "I just need to prove it's not mine." Andre's grin widened. "Yeah, sure. Let me know when and where." He slipped into his car, leaving me seething. But I had his agreement. At least, if arrogance was my ally in getting the test, so be it. It didn't stop there. Sophia, in her tearful confessions, had mentioned hooking up with an old ex who lived in our neighborhood. His name was Brandon. Another thrilling prospect. I found his number on an old party invite and called him. He sounded genuinely shocked to hear from me, had no idea she was married when they hooked up. He apologized repeatedly, claimed ignorance. I had no way to verify that, but at least he cooperated. Another potential father lined up for the test. With each conversation, my sense of betrayal deepened. How many people had known about Sophia's affairs but said nothing? How many times had I kissed her goodbye, blissfully unaware that she was off to meet one of these men? Coordinating these paternity tests wasn't easy. I worked with Ms. Hampton's recommended lab, which specialized in discrete genetic matching. Normally, you'd need the mother's sample and a prenatal sample, like amniocentesis, to be certain of paternity. But the lab also offered a more limited test, analyzing potential father's DNA for markers consistent with the unborn child, derived from the mother's blood, which I didn't have, or from advanced fetal genetic material found in maternal blood, if accessible, but that required a mother's sample, something I knew I'd never get willingly. Plan B was simpler. Let each man do a DNA test that I could compare to my own. If the child was significantly more likely to share that man's markers than mine, it might be enough for a legal argument that I'm not the father. My lawyer said it was creative approach, which is lawyer speak for we're flying by the seat of our pants. I arranged for each potential father to submit a cheek swab at a certain facility. The lab then generated a general genetic profile. Meanwhile, I provided my own sample. It wasn't a direct match to the fetus, but once the baby was born, my lawyer intended to present all the data to the court to show that my likelihood of being the father was extremely low, especially if we found a near-certain match among the other men. It wasn't a bulletproof plan, but it was the best I could do without Sophia's cooperation. Ms. Hampton was confident that if, say, Andre's DNA showed a 99% probability of fatherhood once the child was tested, and the court mandated that test once the baby was born, it would clear me. The challenge was to get the court to require a test upon birth, which might happen if I present a strong case that the child likely isn't mine. While I set this up, Sophia was on a warpath. She left me vitriolic voicemails. How dare you serve me divorce papers while I'm pregnant? You can't just walk away from your wife. Her texts were no kinder. She threatened to file a restraining order. Ironically, even though she was the one harassing me, I saved every message as evidence. Meanwhile, she refused to move out of our condo, so I was stuck paying most of the mortgage. She half-heartedly offered to talk things out if I would apologize for leaving, but I refused. There was nothing left to say. My ring was off, and I kept it in a small box in the motel room as a bitter memento. Despite the emotional roller coaster, I felt a grim determination. I had a goal, to ensure I wouldn't be legally shackled to her child. Part of me felt guilty. This was an unborn baby, innocent of all wrongdoing, but I just couldn't bear the thought of being forced to raise or pay for a child fathered by someone else while living with the scars of betrayal. After a few weeks, the lab compiled the results. Each man's genetic profile was stored, waiting for a comparison to the baby's DNA. But that final piece wasn't available yet. The lab could only confirm that among the men tested, some had more genetic markers in common with each other, like familial lineage or certain traits, than with me, but that wasn't conclusive regarding paternity of the unborn child. However, Ms. Hampton assured me that these profiles would be enough to request a court-ordered test once the baby was born. If we found a strong match among the men who had agreed to be tested, I'd be off the hook. If not, there might be more men we didn't know about. That idea alone made me dizzy with rage and despair. My wife kept calling, demanding to see me. I refused. She even showed up outside my motel once, banging on my car window, screaming that I was destroying her life. The manager nearly called the cops. I asked her to leave, told her we'd speak through lawyers. She spat at me, actually spat on my windshield, then stumped off. I watched her go, stunned. This was the same woman I once asked to be my partner for life. About a month later, we had our first court hearing regarding temporary arrangements, spousal support, living arrangements, the question of my potential responsibility for the unborn child. Sophia was there, wearing a conservative maternity dress, playing the victim card. She painted me as a villain who deserted a pregnant wife. My lawyer countered with evidence of her infidelity and testimony from Nick and Andre admitting they had affairs with her. The judge looked appalled. He ordered a temporary arrangement where I had to pay a small amount of spousal support until the divorce was finalized, but no child support until paternity was established. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Outside the courtroom, Sophia glared at me, tears in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I remember the day of our wedding, how she cried tears of joy. Now it was just venom. She hissed, "You'll regret this, Elliot. You can't wash your hands of me and this baby." I didn't reply, just walked away. I felt sick at how deep her bitterness ran. But I also felt freed by the knowledge that at least the judge hadn't forced me into monthly payments for a child who might not be mine. The next few months blurred together. I returned to work, ignoring the pitying looks from co-workers. Nick avoided me, which was fine. Andre stayed cocky, which I ignored. I rented a small apartment closer to the office, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. At night, I'd stare at the walls, wondering how my life had derailed so fast. My lawyer said we had to wait for the baby's birth to do the definitive court-ordered test. I tried to focus on the positives. I regained a sense of self. I was escaping a toxic marriage. For the first time in months, I could sleep without hearing constant arguments. Yet a small part of me mourned. I had wanted to be a father. I had pictured holding a newborn in my arms, teaching them to ride a bike someday. All that had been stolen from me by Sophia's betrayal. At times, the grief felt overwhelming. Then the day finally came. Sophia went into labor. I heard through a mutual friend that she was at County General Hospital. My heart pounded. Did I even have a right to be there? We were still legally married, but the emotional gulf between us was enormous. Morbid curiosity tugged at me. I wanted to see the child, if only to know if it bore any resemblance to me. Ultimately, I decided not to go. Instead, I waited, phone in hand, half expecting some update from her or from a third party. A day later, Ms. Hampton called. Sophia's attorneys reached out. She said she had a baby boy. They want to begin child support proceedings immediately. My chest clenched. But we can request a DNA test, right? We already have. Ms. Hampton confirmed. The judge is scheduled to review it within the week. In the meantime, her lawyers claim we're stalling. But the judge is likely to require a paternity test before finalizing child support. You will have to go in for testing, and they'll test the baby. I exhaled, relief washing over me. This was it, the final step in the plan. In the best scenario, the test would reveal the baby's father was among the men tested. If not, at least it would show the baby wasn't mine. Either way, I'd be free. Or so I hoped. I still remember the day we did the test. I arrived at the clinic with Ms. Hampton, where the court-appointed nurse had her sign forms. Sophia was already there, holding the baby, who was wrapped in a blue blanket. Our eyes met for a tense moment. She looked tired, but her gaze flashed with anger. "You can't run from this," she whispered, cradling the infant. For a split second, I felt a pang. This was a tiny child, wailing softly, and I was his mother's husband. In some parallel universe, I might have been overjoyed, but not in this one. I gave my sample, a cheek swab. They took a swab from the baby. 2. Within a couple of days, the results would go to the judge. I left without another word. When the results came, Ms. Hampton called me to her office. My stomach was in knots the entire drive there. She greeted me with a small smile. "Elliot, I have good news. You're not the father, and the likelihood is extremely high that the father is Andre." She handed me the official document. My eyes scanned the lines. Probability of paternity, Elliot Jennings 0%. My knees nearly buckled. A wave of relief flooded me, so intense I thought I might cry. Ms. Hampton explained that the judge would accept these results as conclusive. It meant I was free from child support claims, at least for that baby. The divorce proceedings would continue, but the paternity question was settled. My soon-to-be ex-wife had no claim against me for the child's expenses. I thanked Ms. Hampton over and over. She nodded with professional composure. "Sometimes the hardest battles are also the most necessary," she said. Sophia was furious. Apparently, she tried to claim the results were tampered with, that I'd rigged the test. The judge, however, saw no reason to doubt the lab's integrity. Soon, the divorce was finalized. I gave up the condo, let her keep it. In fact, because I didn't want to be reminded of that life. She ended up defaulting on the mortgage within a few months anyway. It didn't magically wipe away the emotional scars, of course. I spent many nights lying awake, wondering how I missed all those red flags. I wondered if I'd ever trust another partner. Some days, I felt anger gnaw at me, wanting to lash out at Sophia or any of the men. Other days, I felt an overwhelming sadness for the naive version of myself that used to dream of a perfect family. But I also felt a slow, steady healing. I saw a therapist who helped me work through the betrayal and heartbreak. I confided in a few close friends who supported me beyond words. Over time, the raw sting of it all softened into a memory, albeit a painful one. I found a decent apartment in the city, started focusing on my career. The gossip at work died down after a while. Nick eventually apologized again, this time more sincerely. I forgave him, not because what he did was okay, but because I needed to let go of resentment. Andre ended up transferring departments. We haven't spoken since. As for Sophia, she moved out of state about a year later. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she'd left the baby with her mother most of the time, chasing a different life. It was none of my concern anymore. I started dating again, cautiously. At first, every time someone gave me that warm, flirtatious smile, I'd flinch inside, fearing more betrayal. But I learned to set boundaries, to communicate openly. I vowed never to be so blind or unassertive again. The day my divorce was officially recognized, I took a solo trip to a cabin by a lake. Just me, the water, and a stack of books. I remember waking up each morning to the sunrise glimmering off the lake's surface, thinking, this is what freedom feels like. I'd watch the ducks glide across the stillness, and I'd reflect on how heartbreak can either break you permanently or force you to grow. I chose growth. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments, and thanks for listening.